What if this era of Western dominance is nearing its end? For decades, the United States has been the unchallenged economic titan of the world. With an economy valued at more than $26 trillion, the US doesn't just lead the global economy, it drives it. And it's not alone in this dominance. An informal alliance between the US, Japan, Germany, the UK, France, Canada, and Italy has dominated the global economy for several decades. On the other side of the world, 5 rising powers, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have built a rival alliance, BRICS. When they started, all they wanted was an increased say in international financial institutions. But now they want to rewrite the rules themselves. Their rapid growth and exponential development unite them. But what unites them even more is their courage to break free from Western control. BRICS is mounting a challenge to the G7 that could upend everything we know about global power. So how did the G7 come to dominate the world? Why are some nations now switching sides and joining the BRICS bloc? And what does this mean for the United States and the future of Western influence? This is the story of BRICS versus the G7. Is this the end of Western dominance? What is G7?
They are the familiar features of these annual meetings of global leaders. But what actually is the G7?
G7 is an informal alliance of 7 advanced economies. In 1975, the United States, France, Italy, Japan, the UK, and West Germany formed a group of 6 to provide a venue for non-communist powers to address economic concerns. Canada joined the following year, making it G7. In 1998, Russia was also added, making the group G8. But wait, Russia? With these powers? And it's not G8, it's G7. Hang on, we'll talk about that in a while. So, what do? Well, G7 is a group of economic powerhouses that coordinate on several key issues, such as global security, economic governance, and climate change. On the surface, G7 is an alliance of wealthy nations aiming to solve problems faced by the entire Earth. But if we look deep into it, it reflects Western dominance on the global stage. The main purpose of the formation of G7 wasn't to fix economic disparity, but to set the stage for the world's wealthiest economies to set the rules for other nations. For decades, all these influential countries noted how trade would work, how markets would operate, and even how global crises should be managed. The fact that this was the real purpose of G7 was evident in 2014 when Russia was kicked out following the annexation of Crimea. Now, we do not support Russia on such actions and stand with Ukraine, but would kicking out Russia help overcome global economic disparity? No, not at all. Also, G7 has always ignored the developing and underdeveloped nations of Latin America, Asia, and Africa, otherwise known as the Global South. According to a report, G7 members collectively owe $13.3 trillion to the Global South, with low-income and poor countries in aid and climate action. For all these reasons, more and more countries are becoming unhappy. But what can they do? Alas, there is no one else to compete against Western dominance. The times might change as some other emerging economies like China, India, Brazil, and South Africa come together with Russia to set a rival stage, forming a new global alliance called BRICS. So what is BRICS? And what do they do? Let's find out in the next section. By the way, if you enjoy learning about today's economic stories, make sure to subscribe. BRICS.
BRICS makes up more than 40% of the world's population and a quarter of the global economy, and more countries want to join the club.
In 2001, a Goldman Sachs economist coined the acronym BRIC for the 4 largest and most promising emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. 5 years later, that acronym became a reality as these 4 nations started meeting regularly at BRIC summits. South Africa joined in 2010, making it BRICS. You might be thinking, if the purpose of BRICS is to defy G7 dominance, how come Russia was in both G7 and BRICS from 2006 to 2014? Well, in the start, BRICS was initiated only to call for an increased role in global financial institutions. However, the group became more and more anti-West with time, and a lot of it has to do with Russia being removed from the G7. Today, the group is united more by what it opposes, US dominance and global financial systems, than by what it supports. The group decided to open the doors to new members in August of 2023 at the Johannesburg summit. As a result, 4 new members, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, were admitted on the 1st of January 2024. From the very start, BRICS had one problem, and that was that 2 of its major players, India and China, did not get along with each other. But thanks to G7 kicking Russia out, they've given these 2 nations a mediator to make them work together. Russia now plays a major role in bridging the gap between the 2 of its allies. BRICS has become a major political force that desires to counterweight Western hegemony on global institutions, and for the better reason to serve the developing countries. Today, it is an alliance of 10 countries that collectively account for 36% of the world's GDP. But that is not all. As BRICS is now expanding, it will likely include more members in the future, further increasing its representation in the global economy. We've all heard the phrase, diversity is strength. and BRICS is making that a reality. Let's analyze how we see diverse features in BRICS member nations and how they can help the Union. India and China have the largest populations on Earth, thus you can find the largest consumer market there. Both also have a huge network of supply chains and trade. Brazil's strategic position makes it a possible hub for all of South America. South Africa is an English-speaking nation with a stable democracy and progressive values. Iran is an oil-rich, US-sanctioned country, which means once the BRICS nations can trade with Iran, they'll be able to purchase cheap oils. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE are key OPEC members and influence geopolitics through the oil market. Saudi Arabia and Iran are traditionally seen as rival nations, and they will be able to cooperate with each other through this forum. This diversity strengthens the bloc and will hopefully help them achieve their goals, the most important one being overcoming Western dominance. But where does BRICS stand against the G7? Let's find out in the next section. BRICS versus G7 comparison. BRICS and G7 both have their own strengths and spheres of influence, but both are different in their own ways too. G7 is an old guard that represents wealth and influence. On the other hand, BRICS is a rising voice of a new order to shape the future of developing countries. The question is, who stands tall to beat the other? For starters, let's look at their share of the global economy. Historically, G7 nations dominated the global economy, but as we discussed earlier, BRICS holds a 36% share of the world's GDP. In comparison, G7 only has a 29% share. Most of this shift has only appeared in the last 2 decades. G7's largest economy is, of course, the US, as it has a GDP of $25.4 trillion. On the contrary, the largest economy in BRICS is China, with a GDP of $17.9 trillion US, a huge network of global supply chains and a huge manufacturing power. Next to the US and China are Japan and India, with a GDP of $4.2 trillion. Japan is the second wealthiest G7 member, and India is the second wealthiest BRICS member with a GDP of $3.4 trillion US. If you look at the list of 11 wealthiest nations on the planet, you will see all members of G7, and the remaining 4 that are not part of the G7 are members of BRICS. Financial capital is an important asset in determining how much a group of nations has grown. But to determine how much they will grow, we need to look at another form of capital, human capital. BRICS members states comprise 45% of the world's population. Meanwhile, G7 countries account for only 10% of the world's population. G7 is not expansionist and is only limited to 7 members. Sure, other nations might join, but it isn't very likely, and there isn't any forum for any country to show their interest to join. On the other hand, BRICS has already increased from 5 to 10 members, with more than 40 others interested in joining, including one NATO member, Turkey. All G7 countries trade with other countries in US dollars only. Well, not just them, but every nation on Earth, including the BRICS nations, use US dollars for foreign trade. However, it might be changing in the future. In August of 2023, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called for the BRICS nations to create a common currency for trade and investment between each other as a means of reducing their vulnerability to dollar exchange rate fluctuations. If this happens, this might be the end of Western dominance, something the US and Western nations will never want. So what are they going to do to stop it? Let's find out in the next section. Can the West maintain its dominance? There hasn't been much of a response from any G7 nations yet, as this new currency was just an idea. But the newly elected US President Donald Trump has a one-word solution that will not only prevent BRICS from creating a rival currency, but will solve every problem. That one word is Donald Trump's solution to almost every problem, and the word is tariffs.
The word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word. One of the most beautiful words I've ever heard. It's music to my ears.
It's not just about BRICS currency. The US has dominated the world for a long time by imposing tariffs and sanctions on countries whose policies it does not approve of. On November 30th, 2024, Donald Trump, on his Truth Social account, threatened that he would impose 100% tariffs on BRICS members if they thought of creating a new currency. We all know how direct and rigid Donald Trump is, and he's made it clear that there's no chance BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade, and any country that tries should wave goodbye to America. Leaving aside the fact that Donald Trump doesn't appear to know how tariffs work, through tariffs and sanctions, the US has ruled the planet's power and wealth for almost a century now. The US-led system dictated financial policies, diplomacy, and technology, though a lot of people argue that things might be different this time. A spokesman for China's embassy in Washington, D.C. told the BBC, "No one will win a trade war or a tariff war." Also, this won't be the first time the US would start a trade war with China. Donald Trump also started a trade war with China during his last tenure, and while the trade war affected China, it mostly impacted the US economy. This time, Donald Trump might only make exported goods much more expensive for Americans, as he's not imposing tariffs on China and BRICS nations, but also on its 2 neighbors and major trading partners, Canada and Mexico. This tariff idea isn't going to fail completely either, as it is showing somewhat success already. Saudi Arabia, which is the 5th largest BRICS economy, has frozen its BRICS membership amid the threat. More countries might start leaving once Trump takes office, eventually forcing BRICS to abandon their new currency if they ever even get to make one. Also, we must remember that this BRICS currency was just an idea, and many BRICS members have stated that there are no plans to follow through with it.
Right now, there is no proposal to have a BRICS currency.
Global dynamics do change, and we acknowledge that the West might not remain in power forever, and maybe BRICS is the one to overthrow Western dominance, but the reason for that isn't going to be a BRICS currency that we don't know would even take off or not. But that's what we think. Let us know your thoughts. Would BRICS overthrow Western dominance, or will G7 be able to retain its position? And if there is a shift, how can the G7 adapt to this new world order? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned. See you in the next video.